Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusik, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. In 1968, a book called The Population Bomb, written by an entomologist named Paul Ehrlich, an entomologist is a scientist who studies insects, helped spark a slow-burning but persistent panic in the West that the global population was reaching a breaking point and that too many human beings would soon cause widespread famine and social chaos. This view that a growing human population is an existential threat to humanity remains widespread even to this day. The famous University of Chicago political philosopher Martha Nussbaum, for example, recently stated that given the world's current population, these are her words, quote, "no one should be having any children." Contemporary empirical evidence, however, points in exactly the opposite direction. The issue of the future isn't too many babies, it's too few babies. Deaths are already outpacing births in many regions of the world, resulting in precipitous declines in national populations. Is this reversal, an explosion turned into an implosion, good news for humanity? Are public policies aimed at population control justified both domestically and internationally? Is there such a thing as an ideal population size? And why, finally, should anyone care about whether others choose to have children or not? Here to help us think through these and related questions is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, welcome back to the studio.
Always good to be with you, Matt. Thanks.
So today we're talking about a pretty complex topic. It's the declining birth rates across the globe and the implications of that and how the church might be able to respond. But with the school year now getting underway, what's been on your mind recently?
You know, the seminarians in my diocese. So last spring, I ordained 3 guys to the diaconate, and then I ordained 3 other guys to the priesthood. And we currently have 27 in the pipeline for priesthood, which for our diocese is pretty good. When I started here as bishop 2 years ago, we had about 20 in the pipeline. So we've gone up, significantly. And I've made it such a priority in our diocese. We've got to work on vocations. So I think people have responded. And it's always a joy for me. The seminarians often accompany me at big liturgies as servers, but I get to the seminary a lot, both here in our diocese. We have our college level seminary, and also up at St. Paul Seminary in the Twin Cities. So, I'm just happy about that, the number of guys.
I was watching your installation when you first came here as bishop.
Yeah.
It was live stream, and I was watching still back in California. I remember you saying to your director, right? Double it.
Let's double it, and we're getting there.
That's beautiful.
We're getting there.
Praise God. So we are discussing today something that many now are calling a demographic crisis, referring to declining populations in many regions of the world. So I'm going to start off with some stats, some pretty shocking stats, and then get your reaction to that, and we'll move into the issue more deeply from there. So according to numbers published by the news site Bloomberg, nearly half of the global population lives in countries now where the birth rate is substantially, in some cases, dramatically below the 2.1 births average per woman, and that's what the replacement rate is. So you have to have that number in order to make up for deaths in a population. This includes, and again, these are some pretty shocking numbers, the United Kingdom, which is at 1.6 births per woman, Italy, 1.2, China, 1.0, India is now below 2%, South Korea, get this, 0.7. Wow. And the United States, we're not doing so well either, it's 1.6. And it's important to note when we're looking at these numbers that according to demographers, it's not that, the population goes down over time and sort of reaches a plateau and stabilizes. No, it accelerates.
It'll keep going down.
Yeah, so for example, it's estimated that within certainly the lifetime of some who are watching this, Japan will have lost an additional 30% of its population. So Bishop, before we do some analysis, including moral analysis of these trends, do these numbers surprise you? Did you ever think we'd be doing a show on this topic?
They do. When I was a kid, it was the opposite. It was, the population explosion.
Right,
and how can we feed all these people? And we got to limit births. And it was a panic in the other direction. But as you say, these are disturbing numbers. And it's not just in a handful of, Western countries, but now, as you mentioned, India and China, the most populous nations on the planet. Japan, which had a very large population, they are disturbing, and it just seems to cut against so much of the basic human instinct, to be fruitful and multiply, we're moving the other direction.
So some hear these numbers and they say, great, the fewer people, the better. So I want to quote Bill Maher, who's come up in our conversations in a number of different ways, who recently said, in response to the question of abortion, here's a quote from him, says, "I'm just okay with that," referring to abortion. "I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on it."
Yeah, great. Tell that to the child, being eviscerated and their limbs torn off. And the self-absorption of that remark is breathtaking.
And what do you think about just sort of the general idea that there's a certain amount of people on the planet that's enough, and at that point we should just stop and do everything necessary to make it stop?
No, the statistics I think have spoken otherwise. Despite the panic from years ago about we're going to keep expanding and we can't feed our people, it's not the case. It's just a matter of the proper organization and the willpower. So I think that's a fantasy that's not backed up statistically, that we're going to be just overpopulated, and now we're moving the other way.
At a theoretical level, from a Catholic perspective, biblical perspective, is there even a hypothetical number we could say that, well, this is the amount of humans that's good, and anything surpassing that would be bad?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not expert enough in that area. I'm trying to bring it down maybe from that level to the personal level. The church would never teach, for example, that every Catholic married couple should have as many children as they possibly can. The church has never taught that. That you can limit births, you can space the births. You have to do so in a legitimate way, a morally legitimate way. So we talk about natural family planning, et cetera. But I think that's important to note. The church doesn't simply say, carte blanche, have as many children as you possibly can. No, there's a legitimate limitation of birth. So I suppose if you extrapolate from that to the bigger picture, you could talk about it, as long as the means being used are legitimate ones.
It's worth noting in this context, so we're still in the context of what Bill Maher said about abortion, that an estimated 73 million abortions per year across the globe. That's just in a year, 73 million abortions. So Bishop, what connection do you see, if any, between societies that permit abortion and societies that just quit having children? Is there any kind of...
Yeah, how any morally alert person could find that number acceptable.
Right.
When you say 73 million abortions every year, right? And we're talking across the globe there, right? But still, every year, I don't know how any morally responsible person could be at home with that. And there is a coarsening, yes, indeed, of our attitude toward life. And if life is just a matter of what we decide is convenient, at the limit, eliminate these lives, and then going forward, let's just not have that many children. So I think, sure, a coarsening. If you really press it, I think it's a question of God, of ultimate value. Mm-hmm. When you lose that, as many people in the West have, then your sense of the future, your sense of the value of life is going to be attenuated, for sure. So I think it's ultimately a spiritual issue, an issue of belief in God.
So as you know, St. John Paul II coined the term culture of life versus culture of death. And at the time, and for maybe perhaps within academic circles up until today, that was taken, the culture of death was taken to be, that's hyperbolic, it's sensationalistic. But do you think it's time to reappropriate, to reuse his language to describe what's going on sort of across the board? Yeah,
no, he was right. Was that, 1995?
Evangelium Vitae,
no, he was right then, he's right now, it seems to me. There is a kind of either or about it. It's to go back to the book of Joshua. You worship the gods here, but I and my family, we're going to worship the Lord. You make a decision. Are you pro-life? Are you anti-life? And it does have ramifications across the board, not just for a particular issue, but for a whole range of issues. So no, I think that's legitimate language to use.
It seems we might be tempted to think of being anti-life as only including abortion, only including the active taking of human life, but can it also include just sort of refusal to produce new life, to say that's morally unimportant?
Yes, and I think that's that lack of spiritual and moral confidence. When you say, God exists, there are objective moral values, I'm here to do God's will, not mine. Right? And what's God's will for us, as the Bible expresses it, be fruitful and multiply. And that God wants to share his life with people. So when you have those basic assumptions in place, you'll have a different attitude. If your attitude is, no, I'm the Lord of my own life, I make decisions, what's good for me or convenient for me, then you'll make another set of choices. So that's why I say the attenuation of religious belief is behind, I think, a fair amount of this.
One of the most compelling ways that you typically describe sort of our basic orientation to the divine and to reality is using von Balthasar's the ego drama versus the theo-drama. Can that also be folded into this, the question of reproduction?
No, and that's it. If you say the ego drama, that's my drama that I'm writing and producing and directing and acting in, well, then it's up to me to decide. And if something's inconvenient to my purposes, get rid of it. If it's a theo-drama, it's God's drama. God's directing it. God's producing it. He's drawing you into it to act in it, but it's his drama. You'll look at life very differently. Go back to Stanley Hauerwas, who said at the heart of liberalism is the view that there is no story except the one I make up for myself.
Right.
That's the basic move of the liberal mind. And the biblical story is repugnant to that, because the biblical thing is, no, it's not your story, it's God's story. You're in it. I've talked about the 5-act drama, from creation to the fall, to Israel, to Jesus, to the church. We're in Act 5. So you have to know what play you're in, what act you're in, what's gone before, and what you're being called upon to do. Once you know that, then off you go. But if you're making up the plays as you go along, you'll end up with things like this. You'll end up with, ultimately, yes, the culture of death, right? Because you're the Lord of your life, and what gets in the way is expendable.
It's very, very understandably the question to have children within a marriage is, and as you say, you can time it out using the natural flying method, is intensely personal. But is there a dimension of the common good to producing new children? Can we think of it as a societal good as well?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So there's the particular decision, let's say a couple makes about, how many children we're going to have using legitimate methods, all that. That's certainly true. But that the general attitude should be, a major part of our marriage, the reason we came together is to have children and to share life with them and to open them to the salvation God wants to give them. And that should be the default position of any Catholic who marries, it seems to me. When I think too many Catholics have given into the sort of societal view of, let's just keep it very limited. And, granted, it is a personal decision and people make it for all kinds of reasons.
Of course.
But the default position, I think, should be one that's very much openness to life, let's say.
We'll look at some reasons that come out in studies that young people especially are offering now for why they're not choosing to have children. But let's just start off at that sort of basic public policy level. Is there any kind of moral justification from the church's perspective for a society to implement measures that have the direct aim of limiting the human population?
No, not if they're intrinsically evil. So the church can never get behind a societal policy that is fostering something intrinsically evil. And that's true at the personal level as well, but it's true at the public level. So no, the church can't do that.
How about a kind of humanitarian or putative humanitarian aim that says, well, look, we're going to impose these policies in order to feed the children who are already here, and not worry about those who potentially could be here. Is there a justification along those lines?
I don't think so. Again, I think statistically it runs in the other direction, and it's a false problem. That there's not enough to go around, and that goes back to the 1970s and that kind of panic about overpopulation, when in fact the stats you're giving us are showing the opposite. If anything, the numbers are going down, and we'll have surpluses and so on. So I think that's a specious argument.
Yeah, just to pause on that for a moment, my background was in the study of ethics, and there'd always be these hypothetical problems that didn't actually exist in the real world. And I think that's the case here as well.
I think so, yeah. It's the opposite. We have the opposite problem.
What about, and this may be a little bit more complex, the environmental argument that's sometimes made for a justification for limiting the human population. Is there ever a justification to say the human population should be limited so that other species of animals and plants can continue to exist in their natural environment?
No, and again, I think as you suggest correctly, we have to be careful about it, lest we give into a kind of, anthropocentric imperialism. As we said last time, yes, salvation has to do with the whole world and with the world of nature, and it's ingredient in Catholic social teaching to have a deep respect for nature and for animal species and all of that. So I don't want to leave that unsaid. Nevertheless, there's a primacy to the human. We don't think we're just one animal among many, and well, to allow one animal species to survive, let's punish the human species. No, that's not biblical. We have stewardship over creation, and that's it hits both the primacy of the human and the responsibility of human beings vis-a-vis the rest of the natural world. But it can't be the zero-sum game, of like, well, we better decrease so that other animal species can increase. I go back to, it's a song I like a lot, John Denver's Rocky Mountain High, but there's that line, I try to understand, more people, more scars upon the land. And I thought, no, man, that's good. You love the Rocky Mountains, I get it, I love them too. But you can't construe people as scars upon the land. People should be respectful of the land, I get that. But when you see people as like an intrusion upon the world of nature and they're just doing damage to nature, something's gone off in your priorities.
This brings to mind, and you wrote an article about this a few months ago, that Apple commercial, you remember, where Mother Nature is personified as a woman who's, has her arms folded and is looking around to see how the Apple Corporation is going to appease her. And you said, that's not it. That's not the right understanding of nature. Can you actually go through that argument a little bit?
Don't turn nature into God. Nature isn't God. I was going back to Chesterton, who said, it's his book on St. Francis, don't call nature our mother. Call nature our sister.
That's right.
That's much better. You say Mother Nature, it now turns nature into a God. No, nature is our sister because we come from the same father, right? And that's lovely because, of course, you love your sister and you want to protect your sister and you're very concerned about her. So there's Francis, brother, sun, sister, moon. Right. But he wouldn't say, the sun is my father, the moon is my mother. No, they're brother and sister. That's the right attitude. So it's the full respect that we owe to nature, but we don't turn nature into a god or a goddess.
Whether it's the humanitarian cover or the environmentalism cover, it seems that in both those approaches, there's a kind of utilitarianism at play, the greatest good for the greatest number, based upon defining good as the limitation of suffering of sentient beings. What's the church's overall approach to the theory of utilitarianism as a moral theory to address these issues?
Well, I mean, first of all, it goes back to John Stuart Mill, and then it comes up in forms of consequentialism in the 20th century. First of all, just from a pragmatic standpoint, it's really impossible ever to gauge that. It's one of those ideals that's impossible ever. It might sound attractive on the page, but it's impossible to work out, in fact. How would you ever determine the greatest good for the greatest number? The other problem is that it overlooks the category of the intrinsically evil. Are there some things that are simply wrong in themselves, no matter what might come of them as a consequence? Even if you say, hey, I do this heinous thing, it'll result in great good for lots of sentient beings. The Catholic doctrine is, well, I don't care. That's not the relevant point. If the act is intrinsically evil, nothing justifies it. So it's a consequentialist form, and it has a finally unusable principle in fact. So that's my hesitation with all forms of that Millian approach.
And sometimes it's been explicitly used in population reduction arguments,
of course,
for example, mass sterilizations and some very dark spots in human history.
Absolutely right. And as you say, in recent years, that's not some ancient history we're talking about.
That's true.
But that's been in recent years, attempts by the government, to control. And we saw it in China and India. I suppose has the same thing, huh? The government limiting births, and so that's obviously problematic.
It's wrong, intrinsically wrong. All right, so let's now turn to some reasons that this shows up in poll data that couples say for why they just don't want to have children. So one of them is that it's not fair to potential children to be born because the world is in such terrible moral, economic, and environmental shape that's an injustice to potential children. What's your take on that?
We'd never have children because I can't think of one moment in human history, recorded human history, that's not been characterized by extraordinary suffering and injustice and stupidity and hatred. And to say, well, it's a terrible world. Well, look, it's always been a terrible world. It's a fallen world. It's a compromised world. But a child is a sign of hope in the midst of all that. So to me, that's a completely specious argument. You'd never have children, ever, if you said, I will only bring them into a properly functioning world. It's like, it's like, this as a parent, when you're sending your kid off for the first day of school, and this kid's going to suffer. Of course, I know that. They're going to be teased at school. They're going to fail. They're going to fall and scrape their knees. They might break their arm on the playground. I mean, yes, of course they will. But so stay home. Stay home. Never, ever, ever go out to school. Well, no, of course not. You go out into the kind of adventure of life, knowing you'll suffer. Well, parents bringing a child into the world, think of. I mean, you know that. What this child will endure from birth to the age of 85. All the suffering. But should that prevent you from having the child? No, it seems to me. It's you're drawing them into the great adventure and beauty of life, knowing full well they're going to get knocked around a lot in life. But that should never be a reason not to have children.
One of the striking, perhaps even absurd thing you see emerge when you actually look at the data is that there's higher birth rates in some periods of warfare than there are now. Yeah. And so that seems to show
I believe that.
This doesn't make sense. I mean, people were having babies during World War II at a higher rate in some cultures.
What's causing it now, I think, as we said, is a spiritual crisis. It's a lack of confidence based on the lack of belief in God. And then you say, well, what's the point? What's the purpose? It takes the wind out of your sails morally and spiritually when you say there's no God.
Another common reason that shows up in polling data is young people say, well, it's just too expensive. And economic security and economic prosperity even are higher goods than having children. How do we assess that claim?
What was that article or the cover story in Time magazine several years ago? And it showed this young couple on the beach, in their bathing suits, and they're young and beautiful and svelte, and they had a beach ball with them or something. But it was no kids. That they decided no kids. We just want to live our lives. I thought, how pathetic! What a pathetic picture that is. Now again, please, I understand couples who can't have children. I'm not bad mouthing couples that have no children. But the attitude of no, I'm just going to live my life and I'm just indulging my desires, and my wife and I are just going to go to the beach and enjoy our life. There's just something, it's anti-human, that we're meant for this great adventure. And the parent that gives herself or gives himself in sacrifice to children and says, my life is now not about me, but about you, that's how they find their salvation, So I think that's just a spiritually corrupt attitude.
This is from Pew data specifically, that of young people, so below 50, who do not have children, 57% say the reason is they just didn't want to. So Pew offered all these reasons, and that's the one they selected. They just didn't want to. How do you think we got to this point? You spoke a little bit about just sort of the spiritual decline.
It is. It's go back to I read this recently with the anniversary of D-Day. The number of the soldiers, right, who landed on those beaches, who believed in God, was extraordinarily high.
Right, yeah.
Extraordinarily high, because they were supported by a culture in which 98% of people went to church or believed in God. That makes a difference. If you believe in God, then you'll make sacrifices like that. Your default position will be one of generosity, because you've been attuned to God, whose very nature is love. That's not trivial. So now you stop believing in God. You stop going to church. You don't hear that language anymore. I just don't want kids. I don't want to hit the Normandy beaches. I mean, I don't want to defend my country. I mean, what's the point?
It seems it's a united kind of disposition across
I think
the board,
so.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a boredom at the level of the heart. And it's belief in God that awakens you to purpose and meaning and self-sacrifice. And that's why, I don't want to sound like it's a little fuddy-duddy, but my parents' generation had something that is tragically lost on many today. They had that sense of purpose and a simple set of values that ordered their lives. And we've lost that to our great detriment.
Do you see any sense of duty also enfolded in that, in the purpose and meaning?
Yeah, of course. That's it. It's not just, we're all big on the rights languages and privileges languages. What are my rights? What are my prerogatives? And fine, we do have them given our human dignity. But then balancing rights is always duties. Well, now, what are your obligations? I said that at the Eucharistic Congress last summer,
right,
where I said, there's been a lot of talk about the rights of the laity. Great. They do. Laity have rights, and they were overlooked and all that. But I said, now what about the obligations of the laity?
We'll move to looking at the church's sort of constructive position in response to the goodness of having children in just a moment. But another data point to highlight here is that whether it was over 50 who were the reasons they hadn't had children, under 50, no matter what reason they gave, all of them recognized that their old age would be difficult because they've chosen not to have children.
Yeah.
So there's still this sense in that there's a continuity of life that they're breaking.
Yeah, I think that's true. And how could you miss that? You
Yeah.
know, I'm going to die kind of alone. And you know, I think of my dear mother died last summer at the age of 101. And the way, especially my sister and brother, because I was in California and then I was in Minnesota in her like last years, how they were so attentive to her. And it was lovely to see, you know, because I vividly remember when my mother was sacrificing her life for them and made their lives possible. And then at the end, you know, when my mother was very old and very infirm, it was her children that sacrificed themselves for her. And that's the beauty of it, in a way. In the economy of grace, you know, what role did my mother's long decline play? You know, and was it partially it drew forth from my brother and sister great generosity.
Right.
And so when you read it from a sacred standpoint and not just a psychological standpoint, new vistas open up, don't they, of meaning.
That's right. That's right. And that's cross-culturally.
Yeah.
For all of history, that's been the cycle of life.
What is the thing, you would probably know better, I think it's in Japan where, I shouldn't laugh, but poor people have these like robots or something that are now taking care of them as they get older.
And they give like emotional responses as well.
And you know, God bless them, but it's so pathetic.
It's terrifying.
But if our stats, you know, you're saying in Japan, they're going to lose 30% of the population. And the population will age and age and age, and there aren't young people coming along. And then robots are feeding you when you're an old person?
Well, we can see this. I've done some ministry in the past in some nursing homes, and you can see of those who have children, oftentimes the children almost never visit, but there's now some who are there who have no children, and they're just alone in these places.
I know, and it's dreadfully sad.
It is sad.
But there's that thing, again, about from the divine perspective. It's not, my life was a great success because I did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that's great. You know, I'm all in favor of achieving great goals, but what makes your life successful? We would say, you know, in the evening of life, you're judged by love, as John of the Cross put it. You know, what finally matters is the quality of your love. So as you've been achieving all these great things, if you've been missing the opportunities for love, you're missing out on the one thing that matters. And so, you know, it was my mother's old age and her infirmity. It's an occasion, especially I give my brother and sister the great credit. I mean, to call forth from them great acts of generosity. That's what makes life meaningful.
Well, let's end by turning to the church's constructive, beautiful vision for the goodness of life. How would you, in its pithiest sense, explain why the church thinks that forming families and having children is so central to the human adventure, as you put it?
Well, go back to the biblical injunction. It runs right through the Old Testament. You know, be fruitful and multiply. It's always a sign of God's closeness, is that his human followers become superabundant in their life. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. Well, that applies to me as an individual, but also to the human family. As the human family increases, that gives glory to God because God wants to share his life. Now, we participate in that creativity, parents do, when they share life. Spiritual fathers, I speak now as a priest and a bishop, that's what spiritual fathers are supposed to do, is share life at the spiritual level. So we're all in that same game, and if you start turning inward, right, curvatus in se, you turn inward, I'm worried about my life and my comfort and well, then you're defeating the divine purpose, which is to be generous and self-giving. So I think that's the basic biblical justification.
As you know, Bishop, the church has held fast to the view that it's immoral for couples to use artificial birth control, and it's a position that Pope Paul VI reaffirmed in his 1968 encyclical Humanae Vitae. This doctrine has always had a hard time especially in the wider culture, including outside of the church, even within Christian circles. However, do you think that the demographic crisis is an opportunity for us to reassess really maybe even the prophetic nature of what the Pope was arguing?
Yeah, I do. And that document was remarkably prophetic. It was massively criticized when it came out. Paul VI most of his biographers say never quite recovered from the critique he got over Humanae Vitae, but I think he proved to be a prophetic figure. And I thought of it a lot. I was in Rome, actually, for the Youth Synod when he was canonized. And to be there in St. Peter's for his canonization was very moving. And I think that's maybe his real holiness came from that moment.
Right.
You know? But yeah, I do. I think when the basic attitude toward life becomes coarsened and the sense of generosity is lost, that's what he was noticing in the rise of contraception and the ease of contraception was a kind of indifference to life, a coarsening. Does that have ramifications beyond that particular issue? Yes,
Yeah.
I would say. And
Right.
he did see that. I mean, read those. I forget the paragraph numbers. I think it's 19, stays in my mind. But read those paragraphs where he acts as a prophet and says, here's, from this particular issue of artificial contraception, what might follow. And it's like right out of the headlines today. So he was prophetic in that text.
So let's look forward now. We'll sort of look at a negative but realistic note and then a positive note to end with. But sort of being realistic about the future, we have crossed, what's clear from the data is we've crossed a demographic Rubicon. I mean, the decline can't be fixed at this point because it's so precipitous. So how do we as a church respond not just to a region, but to a world that's going to be, one, smaller, but also have a higher rate of older people in it? How do we look?
Yeah.
How do we deal with that looking forward?
Right. The practicalities of that, we'd have to leave to the more politically minded people. But, the church does what it always does. That image that my colleague Emery de Gaulle used to use at Mundelein, that the church is this great fortress, this great rock, and the culture breaks, the waves break against it.
Yeah.
Oh, boom, boom. But the church kind of maintains its teaching. And I think in this way, we keep announcing life, the God of life, the openness to life program, and the culture is going to break against that. It'll approve it, it'll disapprove it, it'll be in favor of it, it'll be quite, who cares? The church does what it's supposed to do in season and out. We've been through worse times. Is there a kind of hunkering down? Is there something about the church that we gather ourselves, and we live our life with integrity, we announce it to the world, but we have been through worse crises, but it's a serious one. But we keep announcing the gospel in season and out.
On a positive note, and practically speaking, what's your advice for evangelists to use the gospel of life and its beautiful message to evangelize? How can we use that to evangelize the culture?
Yeah, no, I think it happens. Just as John Paul said, the church's social teaching is a great means of evangelization.
Right, yeah.
So this teaching, which is part of the social teaching, but it's a counter witness. And people find that witness compelling. And they hear and they sense in the wider culture, the culture of death in all its ramifications. And when the church keeps saying no, I've used that image before too of whenever the church says no, it's saying no to a no. Hence it's a yes. The church is always yes.
That's right.
It's always yes for life. So when it says no to various things, abortion, euthanasia, transgenderism, and all these various things, it's because it's saying yes. It's saying yes to life. And that witness will have evangelical value. I see that all the time. People will not admit it in comm boxes online. Trust me, they won't. No one ever wants to say, you're right. I hereby surrender. You win the argument. But when you keep witnessing, it does have impact. I hear it all the time. People say, something you said, it finally got through to me. Or something that I saw, the way that person was living, it over many years, it finally changed my heart. So that's the evangelical value of it.
It's now time for our listener question.
Okay.
So today we have Erwin from New York City asking about whether we should continue going to confession even if we commit the same sin over and over again.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is Erwin Bruni. I'm from New York, the Upper West Side. I have a question about confession. I finally went back after many years, and I feel as if we go to confession and we leave and we end up doing the same things over and over again. Does that bother the Lord? It bothers me, and I find myself not going back to confession because I think it's disingenuous. I'd like to know what you think. Thank you. God bless you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for that. And first of all, I'm glad you're going back to confession. That's terrific. After some years, that's always a good thing. And then I like your question. I know people who have wrestled with that. The answer is no, it doesn't bother the Lord at all. He's delighted every time you seek his forgiveness. So that's the bottom line. And I would say, look, if we didn't go back to confession because we keep confessing the same thing, probably most of us would never go back to confession. So no, you seek the Lord's mercy, you keep asking. We all wrestle with certain things in our lives, and we can't give up. You keep opening your heart to the Lord, and that's the best way to do it. And never, ever, ever think that he's like, not this guy, can he get it together? No, on the contrary, he delights in our penitence. And then, you seek the grace of the sacrament. So you receive the absolution from Christ through the priest, but you're getting the grace of the sacrament. Keep opening yourself to that. Keep praying. Bring that stubborn sin or sins before the Blessed Sacrament. Bring them to Mass at the Confiteor, and say, Lord, give me the grace to do better with this. So just enter into that attitude and don't ever, ever, ever give up on confession.
Well, thank you so much, Erwin, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question for a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. That's askbishopbarron.com. We'd love to hear from you. We've reached the end again, Bishop. Thank you. It's a really beautiful conversation.
Yeah, always enjoy talking to you.
Look forward to the next one.
Thanks.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. We'll see you next time.